Story 1. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Camping is supposed to be relaxing. A way to disconnect from the chaos of everyday life. But sometimes, it turns into something else entirely. Tonight, we'll be sharing a few true horror stories from the wilderness. And this first one, well, it still gives me chills. It happened in the summer of 2021. I was 24 at the time, having just finished grad school. So when my friend Tyler suggested a short hiking trip, I said yes without much thought. He'd done this trail once back in college. Said it was quiet, peaceful, and not too far from the Tennessee-North Carolina border. It sounded perfect. We planned a 3-day, 2-night trip, just the three of us. Me, Tyler, and James. We arrived early and started walking, excited to be off the grid for a bit. Strangely, we didn't see a single person all morning. Not one. Then, around noon, we stopped at a ridge to take a break. That's when we saw him. An older man came up from a narrow side trail. He looked like he was in his mid to late 50s. Wore a faded green jacket, dark pants, and heavy boots. But what stood out the most? He wasn't carrying a backpack. No gear. No supplies. Just a weathered wooden stick in one hand. And a small metal canteen strapped to his belt. He didn't say much. Just gave us a short nod as he passed, didn't slow down, didn't look back. And the whole time, under his breath, he was humming. A low, slow tune. Repetitive. Steady. It stopped the second he disappeared into the trees ahead of us. At that point, we were at least 6 miles in. Deep into the forest. No roads nearby. No cabins. Nothing. We watched the trail where he vanished. And for the first time that day, it felt like the forest was watching us back. No cabins or shelters were marked anywhere on the map. And honestly, people don't usually hike that deep into the woods without gear. But we told ourselves he might have been an experienced hiker. Or maybe he had a campsite tucked away nearby that we just couldn't see. We pushed the thought aside and kept moving. By late afternoon, we reached our planned campsite. We set up the tent, boiled some food, and sat around a small fire. No one mentioned the man again. But we were all thinking about him. You could feel it in the silence between our conversations. Like there was a question hanging in the air that none of us wanted to ask. That night passed without anything unusual. By mid-morning the next day, we reached the ranger outpost. It was a small wooden building near a still, quiet lake. No one was inside. The front door was open. There were some old water pumps beside it, so Tyler used them to fill our bottles. Meanwhile, James wandered over to check the posted trail maps on the wall. There was a bulletin board covered in faded papers. Most of it was outdated info, warnings about fire bans, trail updates, missing gear. But in the bottom corner, I saw something that made my stomach turn. It was a missing person flyer. Black and white. The man in the photo. It was him. The same man we'd seen on the trail the day before. His name was Thomas Gray. Missing since November of the previous year. Last seen somewhere near Pine Hollow. Still not found. James came into the outpost and looked at the flyer. He just stood there, silent for a few long seconds. Then Tyler walked in and saw it too. None of us spoke. Not at first. Then James broke the silence. Maybe, we were wrong. Maybe it wasn't him. We didn't respond. That night, we camped in a lower area where the trees grew thicker. The canopy above us blocked out most of the sky. There was barely enough dry ground to set up the tent. Too damp to start a fire. So we stayed inside, listening to the sound of the woods. Distant rustles. The occasional drip of water from the trees. I couldn't sleep. And then I heard it. A slow, steady humming. Faint. Just outside the tent. It was the same tune as before. That low, steady humming. Circling the tent, moving slowly. Then it stopped, right behind us. I didn't move. None of us did. For a long time, there was nothing. No wind, no crickets. Just silence. And at some point, I must have drifted off to sleep. In the morning, I asked the others about it. The humming from last night. Both Tyler and James heard it too. But they didn't check outside. They said they were too scared. After that, we didn't talk much. We just packed up our gear and got back on the trail. We moved faster than usual. No brakes. No trail map. No joking around. Just 3 guys, walking in silence, staying close together. It was late morning when we finally saw it. That old, rusted metal post marking the last 5 miles of the trail. After that, the path began to slope downhill. The trees started to thin. Sunlight pushed through the canopy in long, pale beams. It should have felt like a relief. But it didn't. About an hour later, we heard something up ahead. It wasn't loud. But it was close. A voice. Calm. Steady. Calling my name. Then Tyler's. Then James's. One after the other. It was the same voice we heard 2 days earlier. On the ridge. The man with the green jacket. The one with no backpack. We stopped walking. No one said a word. We just stood there, frozen in place. Then, as if by some silent agreement, we kept moving. The final stretch of the trail felt wrong. Too quiet. Too long. Time moved strangely. Like the woods were holding on to us, not ready to let us go. But eventually, we saw it. The same signpost from day one. And beyond it, the gravel parking lot. Empty. Still. Our car was right where we left it. We dropped our packs without a word. Tyler got behind the wheel and started the engine. As we pulled out and began down the gravel road, I looked out the window one last time. Back toward the trees. And for just a second, I thought I saw something standing at the edge of the woods. Still. Watching. Humming. A shiver ran down my spine. Because just before we turned onto the main road, I thought I saw something. A shadow. Standing at the very end of the trail. Right where the trees began again. It was still. Almost blending into the tree line. I turned to tell the others. But when I looked back, it was gone. We didn't talk much after the trip. No group chat. No check-ins. Just silence. Everyone drifted back into normal life. Or at least, we tried to. But a few weeks later, Tyler called me. His voice was low, uneasy. He said something had changed with James. He'd stopped showing up for things. Stopped replying to messages. So Tyler went to check on him in person. He said James looked exhausted. Pale. Eyes heavy, like he hadn't slept in days. He told Tyler he kept hearing something at night. A voice. Calling his name. Over and over. From just outside his apartment door. He never opened it. But it kept happening. Every night. Story 2. This happened a few years ago, during a strange time in my life. I was between jobs and had way too much free time. I felt stuck. Unmotivated. Like I was drifting. So I thought a solo camping trip might help clear my head. But I didn't want to go to a crowded campground. I wanted something quiet. Remote. Somewhere I could be alone with my thoughts. Then, one weekend, I found a small used bookstore just a few blocks from my apartment. It was the kind of place that smelled like old paper and wood polish. The shelves were packed with faded novels, old travel journals, and out-of-date guidebooks. I ended up buying a thick second-hand camping guide. One of those giant ones that lists every state forest and trail across the country. Later that night, when I got home and started flipping through it, a folded piece of paper slipped out from between the pages. I opened it. It was a printed camping permit, for a place called Eagle Hollow State Forest. The issue date was from 2009. There was a name typed on it, along with a faded stamp at the bottom that read, "Access granted." Curious, I looked it up online. It turned out Eagle Hollow was real. But there wasn't much info available. No official website. No current campsite booking system. Just a handful of old trail reviews and one blurry map from 2011. I figured it was probably just one of those forgotten forest zones that never caught on with tourists. I wasn't really thinking about rules or permits. I just wanted a few days in the woods, alone. So I printed the permit again, same name, same details, and made plans to go that weekend. It took nearly 6 hours to drive there. And the last 40 minutes? All trees and dirt roads. There was a weathered wooden board near the entrance to the forest. No recent notices. No maps. Just a faded sign that read, Eagle Hollow State Forest. I kept driving until I found a narrow pull-off near what looked like the trailhead. It wasn't marked clearly, but it was the only visible path into the woods. I parked there, grabbed my gear, and followed the GPS coordinates from the permit on foot. After about 20 minutes of walking, I reached the marked spot. It was quiet. In the middle of a small clearing, there was a metal post stuck into the ground. It had a number etched into it, the same number printed on the permit. The area was flat and just wide enough for a tent. No fire rings, no benches, no signs of recent use. No trash. No footprints. Nothing. Still, I shrugged it off. Not every campsite gets regular traffic. I set up my tent, boiled some water for instant noodles, and sat quietly until night fell. There were no bugs. No birdsong. Not even the soft buzz of flies. It was a strange silence, deep and heavy. But I told myself it was normal. Forests this deep often feel like that. Until later that night. When I woke up. It was around 3 a.m. At first, I didn't hear anything. Just that feeling. That deep, skin-prickling sense that something wasn't right. I lay still, listening. And then I heard it. Slow, steady footsteps. Circling the tent. One step. Then another. Not fast. Not panicked. Just, deliberate. They stopped after a while. I told myself it could have been an animal. Maybe a deer. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I woke up late the next morning. Stayed in the tent for a while, just thinking about the footsteps. Trying to convince myself I imagined them. Eventually, I forced myself to get up. At first, everything looked normal. But then I started noticing little things. Things that felt off. The top flap of my pack was unclipped. And I always clip it shut. It wasn't a big thing. Not something most people would notice. But I never leave that flap unclipped. Not on purpose. Then I saw the small bag of trail mix I had left inside the tent. It was now sitting just outside the entrance. Still sealed. Not chewed. Not ripped. So it wasn't an animal. But I definitely didn't put it there. That's when I reached for my flashlight. The one I always keep in the left side pocket of the tent. It was gone. I checked the pack again. Nothing. I looked around the tent. Under the floor tarp. Inside my boots. Even under the small cooking gear bag. Still nothing. It was just gone. And suddenly, that heavy silence from the night before made sense. It felt like someone had gone through my stuff. Not to steal anything, just to look. And then they'd put everything back. Almost exactly where it had been. Close enough that I'd barely notice. Except I did. I tried to stay calm. But there was this sick, cold feeling in my stomach. Was someone messing with me? Or was I losing it? I kept thinking about those footsteps. Circling the tent. Stopping, watching. Maybe I should have packed up right then and left. But the drive back was long. Rough, winding dirt roads in the dark. So I told myself I'd stay just one more night. Leave first thing in the morning. That afternoon, I didn't go far. No hiking. No exploring. I stayed near the tent. Ate quietly. Tried to keep my mind occupied. Before the sun went down, I triple-checked everything. I zipped up every flap and pocket. Placed my flashlight, backup battery, and phone inside the sleeping bag with me. Right up against my chest. Then, sometime around midnight, I heard it again. It wasn't footsteps this time. Just a light tap on the side of the tent. Once. And then, nothing. I didn't move when I heard the tap. I stayed frozen inside my sleeping bag, my heart racing. There were no footsteps. No whispering. Just complete silence. I didn't want to make any noise. So I stayed still as possible, for what felt like hours. Then, eventually, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the first light of morning was creeping through the tent. The first thing I did was check my gear. The food box was still closed. My backpack was still zipped. But the flashlight, the one that had gone missing the night before, was back. It was sitting just inside the entrance, placed neatly on top of my boots. That was enough for me. I didn't waste any time. I started packing immediately. Stuffed everything into the bag. Rolled up the tent, didn't even bother folding it. I was out of there as fast as I could. As I walked back toward the car, I kept glancing behind me. My nerves were on edge. When I reached the car, it looked just as I left it. Except for one thing. The permit. The one I had kept folded in the glove compartment. It was now sitting on the driver's seat. I hadn't touched it since arriving. Not even once. I didn't think. I just threw my bag in the back, got in, and drove out. A week later, I tried looking up Eagle Hollow again. This time, I found something I hadn't seen before. A scanned PDF from an old state database. A short notice about campgrounds that had been closed in 2010, after a series of unresolved incidents and lack of available personnel. And there it was. Eagle Hollow was one of the closed areas. I kept digging. I found a forum post from 2012. A user had asked if anyone knew why the forest was closed. One reply simply said, "Too many missing persons, and they stopped investigating after 2009. That was the same year stamped on the permit I found in the book. I still don't know who walked around my tent or who went through my gear. But I know one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. And whoever it was, they didn't want me there." Story 3. This happened 3 years ago when I was around 24, living alone in a small one-room apartment in the city. I had just finished college and was looking for a place to stay. I chose this apartment because my uncle lived in the same building. He helped me find it at a good price. About 7 months after I moved in, I woke up one morning to a Facebook friend request from someone I didn't recognize. At first glance, his profile didn't seem suspicious, but I noticed he was connected to my uncle on Facebook. That made me think he might be a neighbor or someone from the building. His profile showed that he was around my age. Nothing about it screamed red flags, so I accepted the request. I figured it might just be someone I hadn't noticed around yet. But a few days later, he started sending me messages. In the first few, he mentioned that he lived in the same building and that he knew my uncle well. He casually talked about how friendly my uncle was and mentioned seeing me around the building a few times. I didn't recognize him, but I still responded out of politeness. I didn't want to seem rude, especially since my uncle was well known and liked in the building. I kept my responses brief, formal, and cordial, but by then, I was starting to get a feeling. Something about it made me uncomfortable. I began to suspect that my uncle might be trying to set me up with this person. I wasn't in a relationship, and my uncle often asked personal questions about my dating life. Almost as if he was monitoring it. It didn't surprise me too much, considering how involved he was in my life. Still, I had no interest in anything more with this person, but I stayed polite. I didn't want any issues, especially since we lived in the same building. What bothered me more, though, was something that happened a bit later. My uncle didn't know much about technology, and since we lived in the same building, I often helped him with things like that. One day, he asked me to help him with something on his Facebook account. I logged in for him, and as soon as the page loaded, a chat window popped up in the corner. The message was from the same guy who had sent me the friend request. It stood out because it was the only message in the entire conversation, like the rest of the chat had been deleted on purpose. The message didn't make much sense on its own. It looked like part of a longer conversation, possibly continuing from something that had been said before. I can't remember the exact words, but the main idea was that he needed my uncle's help with something. The message ended with a laughing emoji, which made it seem casual and familiar, like they'd been joking about something. But the tone of the message strongly suggested something else. It seemed like my uncle had been talking to him about me, maybe even encouraging him to reach out. Up until then, I had tried to give my uncle the benefit of the doubt. But in that moment, it felt clear that he was involved. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It felt planned. So, I began replying to his messages less often. I had no interest in starting any kind of relationship with this guy. I had been polite, but that was it. I never gave him any reason to think I felt differently. After some time, his messages became less frequent. I assumed he had lost interest, and I didn't think about it again. Life went back to normal, and I got on with my routine. Then, one day, after finishing my work from home, I decided to go out and buy some groceries. But as soon as I opened my apartment door, something fell to the floor. It was a pack of chocolates, carefully placed on the doorknob. At first, I didn't think much of it. There was no immediate suspicion directed toward anyone specific. I picked up the chocolates and set them aside in the room, brushing it off without further thought. A few days later, another item appeared outside my door. This time, it was a small potted plant. Unlike the first gift, this one had a message. A note was glued to the flower pot, followed by a smiling face emoji. For a young woman living alone in her 20s, receiving anonymous gifts with messages that hinted at being watched was unsettling. The lack of a name, no clear sign of who had sent it, made it even more disturbing. I started feeling uneasy in my own home, checking the hallway every time I opened my door. Not long after, I got another message from the same neighbor who had contacted me before, the one I had tried to distance myself from. That message arriving so soon after the gift made everything feel connected. By then, it was clear the situation had crossed every line. Leaving anonymous gifts with messages like, "I like you," wasn't normal or respectful, it felt threatening. But I was too afraid to confront him directly. I had no idea how he would react. Despite being 5 feet 9 inches, which is tall for a woman, I knew he was about 6 feet 1 inch and muscular. His size alone made me feel uneasy. Even though we had barely spoken in person, the thought of approaching him felt risky. Plus, he knew exactly where I lived. So, I decided not to address it right away. Instead, I waited to see if he would slip up or give himself away in his messages. I started listening closely to the footsteps outside my door, trying to figure out if he was coming by again. But nothing happened. I wasn't sure if it had stopped, but I started feeling slightly better. Then, one day, I went to check my mailbox. Inside, I found a bunch of small notes and poems. The poems were strange, each one had 4 lines and sounded romantic. I couldn't tell if he had written them himself, but each one described love in a different way. The strangest part was that every note had a date written on it. Then I realized there was one note for each day of the month. That meant someone had been leaving them regularly, one by one. It hit me, the day I found the chocolates was the same date as one of the notes. I hadn't checked my mailbox that day, so I hadn't seen the note until later. That made me realize he'd been doing this for a while without me knowing. At that point, I had reached my limit. I sent him a message and confronted him. But he denied everything, asking why I would accuse him of such things. Even when I explained everything and mentioned the proof, he kept insisting it wasn't him. He denied all of it. But after I confronted him, everything suddenly stopped. No more gifts. No more notes. No more poems. I don't have clear proof it was him, but the timing was too perfect to ignore. Now, 3 years later, I still live in the same building. When we pass each other, he just says hi and nothing more. I feel safe now, and he hasn't bothered me again. Also, my uncle moved out of the building, so I guess that's a good ending.